Hi, Daisy and Eli. How's your week been?
Good.
Well, I'm just back from this reporting trip to Louisville, Kentucky, where I was covering the very topic that we are talking about this week. These protests happening all over the United States in more than 100 cities. They're happening in Washington, D.C., where I am. Have you heard about them happening in Seattle, where you are?
Oh, yeah.
So the first thing I want to just say right from the beginning, because remember we talked about the elephant in the room? Okay, so right now as we have this conversation, I think one elephant in the room that's worth talking about is that we are discussing the experience of Black people in America, and none of us are Black people in America. I'm white, the two of you are white, and so any conversation we have is going to be trying to understand the experience of someone else, which is a challenging thing to do, right?
We're never really going to fully understand them, but we're going to try to put ourselves in their shoes.
Exactly. That's a good way of putting it. And in my experience, one of the best ways of understanding the experience of someone who's different from me is by reading things that have been written by people about their own experience. And so that's one reason that in the background materials for this week, I gave you 3 pieces that were written by people who had the experience of being a Black person in America, because they were writing about their own life, their own experience, what it feels like for them to exist in this place at this time, or in the case of James Baldwin in 1968. And so, first of all, I just really want to encourage you, not even just for this lesson, but going forward, to read books and essays by people who are different than you, including Black people, but also people who live in other countries and people who have different life experiences, because I find that that, for me, is the best way of really understanding what life is like in the shoes of a different person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I know the big essay that I gave you from the 1619 Project was long and complicated and used a lot of big words. I think it was really important, but if some of it was tough to understand, that is okay. Tell me what you thought of that essay. Did it make sense to you? Were you able to understand it?
Our mom actually sympathized, and she said, okay, I know this is the longest article, so I'm going to sit down and read it, and you can fidget with whatever you want. So we had toys actually that we just found, so we started fidgeting with them, and she read the article. And I think that was the
Great.
article I actually most understood, because we talked about it. We actually had, we were just silent for a minute to recognize the deaths.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So what did you think of that article? I mean, tell me something that you learned from it.
Well, it was kind of gruesome at some points, but it's life. That's how it was for African Americans back then.
I mean, similar things are happening now. I mean,
not that close.
Not that close. But you could say that statement and it might have the same effect. You could read that article and it would be similar to what's happening now as of what's happening 50 years ago. What was happening 50.
I mean, that's something that I wanted to ask you about. I have heard people say slavery ended a long time ago. The civil rights era happened before any of us were born. Why are we talking about those things now? What do those things have to do with the year 2020?
Because there's still racism. There's still white supremacy. There's still riots because African Americans were treated unfairly or killed. There's still everything that was there. It's just not clear, oh, that person is enslaving that person and treating them horribly. It's that person could have been treating that person badly because they were African American. And there's just a pattern after you look at just even 3 incidents. There's a pattern, and you see a lot of the victims were African American. And it's there might not be that much slavery anymore. There still is some slavery.
In other parts of the world, you mean?
Yeah, there could be in the U.S. We could just not know about it. But I don't know.
Well, that's a whole other conversation, actually, which is about the prison system and prison labor, and we could do a whole other lesson on that, actually. But I wonder, when you read the beginning of the essay, when she talks about the American flag that her father always flew, what did you make of that story? Like, why do you think her father flew the American flag, and what made that confusing and complicated for her?
I think her father flew the flag because he wanted to feel like a part. I feel like they felt kind of different because of the segregation. So holding up the American flag was a way of saying, I'm still a part of this, even though like I may feel a little separate. And yes, they probably didn't like the actions that were happening to them, but I guess feeling like you're a part of something is comforting.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Eli, I want to hear what you have to say, Eli. But I want to just tweak one tiny thing of what Daisy said, because I think you have it almost exactly right. But I think when you said he wanted to feel like he was a part, I would change that to he wanted to show that he was a part, because he knew. He knew it's not that he flew the flag to convince himself. It's he flew the flag to claim the thing that he knew was his, which is a belonging in this country and an ownership of the national project that is the United States of America, you know? Do you understand that distinction that I'm making?
Yeah.
Eli, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, well, I kind of disagree with Daisy's thing, because I think that he did it, like you said, to show that he was a part, because he knew he was a part. These African Americans, the country was built on slave labor, and almost all of the slaves, I believe it was like 72% or something, were African American. And
when you've been to visit Washington, D.C., right? You've come to see me here, and you've been to see the Capitol building, right? And the White House and other, famous old monuments. Did you know that the Capitol building was built by slaves?
Well,
I'm not
I
surprised
think
now.
it hinted it in the article somewhere, in one of the
Yeah, no,
articles.
the article mentioned it. The article said that. But it's just interesting that these buildings that we think of as essential to what it means to be American were built by Black people who had no rights.
Yeah, and now it would be breaking the law to have a slave, so it's kind of weird.
There's something that, so I actually, after Nicole Hannah-Jones won the Pulitzer Prize for that essay, I interviewed her. And one of the things I asked her about was the idea of patriotism, and whether patriotism, in her opinion, means something different to Black people and white people. And she said there is a kind of Black patriotism that is, and I'm going to paraphrase here, these weren't her exact words, but it's believing that the country can be better and pushing the country to be better, even when the country is not treating you well. And she said the brand of patriotism that we sometimes see, which is, isn't our country great? We're so proud, we're so happy, is a little bit different from the brand of patriotism that says our country can keep improving, and we're going to help it improve by pointing out the ways that it falls short of its ideals. What do you think of that distinction?
I think like it's, I don't know.
Oh, I thought that's a great quote, but yeah, that does make a lot of sense.
There was a line from the essay that stood out to me. I wrote it down. She said, "For generations, we have believed in this country with a faith that it did not deserve. Black people have seen the worst of America, yet somehow we still believe in its best."
That one is really thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you never really think of what African Americans think. You just think of the situations you're in. And if you try to sympathize for anyone,
If you're white.
but well, anyone.
But if you're African American.
Well, yeah, but
You're saying we all live our own experience. We all go through life as the person who we are.
and feelings are like a whole different category, because sure, you can be in this situation, but feelings are like very personalized and important. So sharing feelings from that point is really valuable. And I think that sentence is very thought-provoking.
And helps you kind of see the way the experience of living in this country is different for other people than it is for you.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you see a police officer on the street, what are the words that come to mind? What's your reaction? Like, what's your feeling about what the police are there to do, and what the police will say and do to you if you come up to them?
Wait, so is this just in a situation where we're walking down the street?
Yeah, you're just going about your life. You're going to the park or the grocery store or whatever, and there's a police officer on the corner. What feelings come up for you?
So we're just in the U.S.?
Yeah, just you, Daisy and Eli, your real selves in Seattle, the people you are. I'm asking about your own personal lived experience right now. Not how you think the world is to other people, but just for you.
I would just probably walk right by. Like, we see police cars driving a lot. Like, I see them going to Starbucks, and I'm just like, oh.
And Daisy, what do you feel?
I've actually met them before, because I was a Girl Scout, so I met them, and they were like really nice people, and I remember it really clearly. And one of the people in our group was actually African American, and they didn't treat them any different. But again, they were a kid, so I didn't really think of them as racist. But about what all of the other people do, I probably wave and smile and say thank you, because regardless of their decisions, they do work really hard. If I see like somebody, I guess, taking out the garbage, I'd say wave and smile. And I wouldn't say thank you, but I'd say hi. If a garbage, I think I'd just say thank you.
I guess what I'm trying to get at is that, going back to the idea that we only have our own lived experience to relate to the world through, we have positive associations with the police. You do and I do. Like, we feel like they're here to protect us, because in our neighborhoods, that's what they do. They protect us. And in many neighborhoods where Black people live, and in the experience of many Black people, they see a police officer, and instead of feeling like, oh, that person is here to protect me, they feel like, oh, I better be on my best behavior so he doesn't suspect me of doing something that I didn't do. Which is a very different emotional association with seeing a police officer, which is informed by the lived experience that people who are different from us have from their interactions with police. Which kind of leads me to the essay by R. Eric Thomas in Elle magazine. Do you remember the essay I'm talking about?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
About trying to be good.
Yeah, that was not.
Oh, it was called It Doesn't Matter If You Are Good.
It doesn't matter if you are good. What do you think that means? It doesn't matter if you are good.
Whether if you are African American or Black, then people automatically think, now some people, maybe, they don't just think yes. Some people just think maybe. So,
maybe
you mean they don't automatically think this person did something wrong, but they think maybe that person is suspicious.
What the article is saying is, no matter what, like, racist police are just gonna think maybe, and they're gonna go out of their way to try to arrest you. I was actually reading a book about this, and I was reading that, and I was really upset. So I had to stop reading the book because like that was like very unrealistically mean. But and I highlighted it and I talked to my parents about it, and I was just surprised.
Yeah.
I believe that book was a true story, if I know the right book.
I hope not, because that's really.
Eli, what did you think of that essay about trying to be good and it doesn't matter if you're good? What did you think of that?
I thought it was kind of the sad truth, because for if there's a racist policeman and they see a black person, they'll just be like, they're up to something, and they might follow you. They might yell, "Hey, what are you doing? Come over here!" and like search them, be like, and if someone like if it's just like a young kid playing in the park and they like don't know their rights, no unreasonable searches, they could just be like, "Oh, okay," and they could search them, and he could be like, "Hey, that's a Swiss Army knife. What are you doing with that?" Like maybe they were just gonna like whittle a spoon out of wood, like some of my friends do that when we go camping.
Yeah, one of the things that the essay referenced was an incident that happened in New York that was one of several things that led to these protests. And it was an incident involving a man named Chris Cooper and a woman who's not related to him named Amy Cooper. And have you heard of this incident? Do you know what happened? Should I tell you a little bit about it?
I think I might know the one you're talking about. I'm not sure.
So tell me if this rings a bell.
I remember a lot of it.
What's that?
I remember a lot of incidents, but the only name I really remember is George Floyd, because it's like plastic.
Right. That one was in Minneapolis. So in this instance, no one died. What happened was Chris Cooper was a bird watcher, and he was out early in the morning in a part of Central Park where you have to keep dogs on a leash because there are a lot of interesting birds and they don't want the dogs running around scaring the birds. And Chris Cooper saw a woman with her dog off the leash, and he said, "Please put your dog back on the leash." Now, the important detail I haven't told you is Chris Cooper, the bird watcher, was black, and Amy Cooper, the woman with the dog, was white. So Chris started filming on his phone, and and then there was another detail before he started filming. He said, "You're not going to like what I'm going to do next." He carried dog treats in his pocket because he so often saw dogs running around off leash that he figured out the best way to get somebody to put their dog on a leash was put out a dog treat. The dog runs over and the person freaks out and puts their dog on a leash. So he starts filming, and Amy Cooper says, "Stop that right now." She starts yelling at him. She says, "I'm going to call the police, and I'm going to call the police and tell them that you're attacking me," or something like that. I'm paraphrasing here. And he says, "Please do." And she calls the police. She calls 911, and she says, "I'm in Central Park, and an African-American man is threatening me." She says, "I'm in Central Park, an African-American man is violently threatening me." On 911, she says, "Send the police, send the police." When that video went up on social media, it had a huge impact. Now, what do you think it is about that video that made everybody respond to it so much?
Because it's like literally, there was just like a simple rule: put your dog on a leash. And he said, there's a simple way to make you do on a leash, and it might not like be the best thing to do, but if someone's saying no, and it's illegal, and if you're like a bird watcher and you care about the birds, and there might be some rare endangered birds here, you can just throw a treat, and the person's like, fine, I'll put it on a leash. That's fine. It's not something to call the police about. But then the woman called the police, and I bet did the person get arrested?
Well, before I answer that question, Daisy, why do you think the phone call made such a big splash? And Eli, you're exactly right. But what do you think it was, Daisy, about that phone call that made such a difference?
She said two things. She said violence and African American or black. And that to police rings a bell. Because all the protest has gone on. Well, for every police, they might react differently to it, but every police, it will probably ring a bell.
Some police might be like, someone's probably racist, or some police might be like, oh, someone doing bad things, or some police might be like,
well, for a moment, rather than look at it through the lens of the police, let's look at it through the lens from the perspective of Chris Cooper, the bird watcher, who, like all of us, has seen the stories of George Floyd, Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin. There's such a long list, and I don't know how many of these names you know, but there are a lot of Black men who police have killed in the last 5, 10 more years. And there have been protests about those deaths, and yet it keeps happening. So if I'm a bird watcher in Central Park and I'm Black, and somebody calls 911 who's white and says, a Black man is threatening me, it's violent, please send the police. What am I going to think as a person who knows about all this history of innocent Black men being shot and killed by police?
Well, that depends. Did that area of New York have a reputation for like being violent to African Americans?
I don't know if that specific area did, but I also don't know whether that matters, because often this happens in areas that it hasn't happened before and it just happened for the first time.
Yeah, I might if there's like very rarely that happens and like all the people who've been kicked out of the police force, I might just be like kind of nervous, but kind of just laugh it off and be like, I'm just gonna show them the video and I'll probably be fine. And also if it was a place where there was records of police being violent, or even a bit of them, like more than like 5 occurrences per year or 2, I don't know what the average.
What do you think, Daisy?
I would be like,
I think as a person who didn't have their dog on the leash, one, I probably have a small dog, so I'd pick it up or put it on a leash.
No. I mean, if you were Chris Cooper, the bird watcher.
Oh.
You were having this argument with this woman, and you heard her call 911 and say, "Send the police right away. An African American man is being aggressive and threatening me."
I would probably show her the video and say, instead of asking the dog to put on the leash, I'd probably, well, it already happened. I'd probably say, your dog is really cute, can I pet it? And be like really overly nice.
But can you understand why maybe people seeing the video would think that woman calling the police on this man could have sentenced him to his death?
Yeah.
You know, she was, in a way, it's like, I don't know if this phrase makes sense to you, weaponizing her whiteness.
Yeah, that does make sense. Being like, I'm white, so police will probably listen to me. Not probably, might listen to me. When I
as a white woman say that a Black man is attacking me, the police will come out guns blazing, even though we have a video to know that that wasn't actually what was happening. So that brings us back to the essay, it doesn't matter how good you are. Because, you know, Chris Cooper, the bird watcher, was a graduate of a good college, and he wore glasses, and he had, you know, like, he didn't look like a threatening person. I mean, not that it matters whether you look like a threatening person, but he wasn't the kind of person who anyone would ordinarily feel threatened by. But he was Black. And in some instances, that's enough to put a person's life in danger, a Black person's life in danger. Let's talk about the third clip I gave you from James Baldwin. Had you ever heard of him before?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, I did hear
that name does ring a bell.
I'd never read any of his papers. He was famous for writing a lot of papers, right?
Yeah, and he wrote novels and books, and it's okay. You have lots of time to read what he wrote.
I don't think I've read anything he wrote, but I've heard of him. Yeah.
He's a great writer. So when you watch that video from 1968, did you think, oh, this sounds so outdated? None of this has anything to do with the way we live today.
No.
Or what? What did you think?
I was like, wow, I wish we could like have everybody be on one TV at once and have people watch this and have like James Baldwin on live TV from in 2020, which would never happen because that's impossible. Wait, is James Baldwin? No, that would not happen.
He's died, unfortunately.
He'd be way too old.
Yeah.
And explain like everything about all the oppression and stuff like that, and have people explain why they think this is happening, why they think it should stop, and stuff like that, and just like have everybody in the world be listening.
You know, it's a great idea. The thing that's a little bit disappointing to me is that people have been explaining for more than 50 years. It's not that people haven't been explaining. It's that the explanations don't get heard and don't lead to action. Daisy, what did you think of the James Baldwin passage?
I thought was James the speaker?
Yep.
Yeah, James Baldwin.
I think he had like a very strong, convincing voice, and I'm getting mixed up between articles. But
This one was the video.
yeah, I just keep on getting it mixed up with the 14-page article because they were similar.
Yeah.
But his words were just so convincing and sad and like.
And familiar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So now I want to talk about what's happening today, but before I do, was there anything about those specific articles that you want to ask me about? Any questions you have about those articles?
One or two questions, but no, it was pretty much explained.
I had a few questions actually.
Yeah.
For the 14-page article, my question, it's pretty simple, but what kind of shops would like hang up the dead people?
Because that is just sadistic and cruel.
Yeah, that's cruel. I mean, sure you can kill them, like, okay,
That's still
but
like
to hang up their
horrible.
dead bodies, to burn them alive, that's just a bit much
A bit much?
for killing,
No.
in the way of
Not
killing.
too much.
Well, yeah.
I think you mean if they would kill someone, why
Well,
couldn't it be something
my
if they
guess-
actually did something
My guess
wrong?
is racist shops, but my question is, was it like the dairy shop? Was it like the meat shop? Was it like the veggie shop?
You know, I don't know the answer to specifically what kind of shop it was, but what do you think it says about society and the atmosphere and the community that they were able to do that?
Just everybody was like, oh, if they saw someone a dead African American body hanging up in a shop, they'd be like, nice job, you got one of them, which is horrible and cruel. And if they saw a dead body hanging in a white shop, they would like, let's say the owners of the shop were African American, they would be dead within minutes.
Right. I mean, people saw Black people as less than human.
And it's like
And-
people hang up like deer heads on walls
That's just a
because
waste
they're
of time.
less than
I
human.
mean, not
So
deer
they are
heads
literally
on walls, but
putting
people.
people on walls to mark them as less than human. They're ornaments for us. We're better than
You know, there's a complicated point that I think it's worth talking about, which is that sometimes when we talk about racism and racist people, it can feel like there's a black and a white kind of person you are. Either you're a racist person or you're not a racist person. And I want to encourage you to move away from that idea and towards a different way of understanding racism, which is that we all have biased thoughts and feelings. And from the time we're born, we are inheriting a culture and a history that was built on racist principles and ideas. And so if we want to actively fight racism, we can't just pat ourselves on the back for not being racist and point at other people and label them as racist. We also have to look deeply at ourselves and the ways in which we might hold ideas that disadvantage people of color and that elevate white people. Even if those ideas are very deep in our ways of thinking, they can influence our behavior in ways that are really harmful, even if we don't think of ourselves as racists. Does that make any sense? Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah.
What other questions did you have about the articles before we move on to what's happening today?
Are most protests violent, like anywhere near 50%, or is it like 10%?
That is a great question. And you know, this brings me to the article that I sent you that was my interview with Attica Scott, the state
Um,
representative in
on
Kentucky.
that one, I was like, I was watching it, and then I was done with it, and then I kept on. Oh yeah, I was listening to it, and then I kept on listening to other articles, so I might get them mixed up with random things that just happened.
That's okay. But the vast majority of protests that we've seen in the last few weeks have been peaceful. And often what makes the news is the windows getting smashed and the clashes between police and protesters. But maybe that happens for the last hour after a 5-hour peaceful demonstration. And so you get the impression that these protests are violent when actually the violence is a very, very small number of people in a very small part of the overall movement.
But are most protests like at all violent? Like in most protests, is there at least one person violent, or is it like 1 in 10 protests have like 1 or 2 people who are being violent, or what?
It's difficult to give a percentage, but most protests are not violent, generally speaking.
I wish they shared good news though, because so much bad news is really not good for health, with all the technicalities.
Anxiety.
And anxiety and all of that. And
yeah.
I mean, we were talking about in class over Zoom, and I just, I had to say something good, because everyone was like, the protests are bad, they should be peaceful, but they didn't know that,
a lot of them
peaceful
probably
protests
did,
happened.
but the question in class was, what are you angry about?
Well, I brought it up because everyone was getting really,
Worked up.
Yeah.
So what do you think, and this is kind of a trick question, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you think these protests right now are about?
Police brutality.
That is an accurate answer, but it's also a specific answer. And in the interview with Attica Scott, we talked about some broader issues.
I actually think, I've been to a protest. I feel like protests, it wasn't violent. It was very peaceful, and it was before COVID. But it gives you a sense of power and knowing. So I feel like African American people and other people go to protests because it gives you a sense of hope and power and knowing, and because you're fighting for a cause.
Right. So the cause in this case, specifically, was police brutality. But do you remember the interview with Attica Scott that I sent you, that I did in Kentucky?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Do you remember at the beginning when we talked about the train whistle?
Yes.
Yeah.
And she said, in this part of town where the Black people live, we can't get them to stop doing the train whistle in the middle of the night. And then the other part of town where the white people live, they have quiet hours where the train whistle doesn't blow. That's not on the posters that people are marching with. But can you understand why that would have something to do with these protests that are happening right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And this is one reason that I sent you the 1619 essay, is that the 1619 essay is not about police brutality, but the things that are described in the 1619 essay inform what people are marching for and what people are marching about today, beyond police brutality. So I guess the last question that I want to ask, excuse me, is what do you think we as individuals can do about it? If we live in a society that treats Black people worse than white people, that makes Black people overcome more challenges and hurdles and work harder to prove themselves and treats them worse, what can we do about that?
We can stand up for people. We can voice what we think and try to get some people to listen, because every person who's trying to stop racism can help, not necessarily mean they help, but they can help in some little way. Or big way.
I would actually, a lot of times people who feel like they don't want to support the cause, think, oh, sorry, well, this happens to us too. And
It's another form of racism.
yes. So how you flip that is, but what they're doing is much worse. And it's really hard to get over just thinking, well, you're not focusing on me, but it's because we are focusing on you. We're focusing too much on you, and we need to think about the lives of other people as well.
Like, it's like, you're being racist to us too, because we were racist to you, but we're not racist anymore. Now you're being racist to us and pretending we were racist. That's just another form of racism. In fact, racism has not stopped.
Yeah. I mean, there's studies that show that in schools, Black kids get disciplined more than white kids for the same behavior. That Black kids get called on less than white kids in the same classes. That this is really everywhere in our society, and it's subtle, and it's not always easy to spot. But if you're living this every day, you feel it, and it builds up over time.
And like a teacher could just be like, well, like a single African American kid could accidentally get a problem wrong. Like one time I was doing a math test and I accidentally wrote 4 for 1 + 1 because I thought it said 2 + 2, and someone could just make that mistake. Oops, they know the answer to it. You say it out loud and they'll be like, oh, right, 1 + 1, 2, obviously. But they won't be able to answer it right, and they'll just embarrass themselves. I won't let them. But in the back of their mind, they'll be like, well, no, they're Black. They won't get it right. They're not.
Exactly. Yeah. So part of our job as people have you ever heard the term white privilege?
Bit.
Well, I feel like I know what it meant if I heard it.
I've heard it like once or twice.
Yeah. So we all have white privilege. The 3 of us do. Like, we go through life just a little bit easier, having to fight a little less hard against the current because of the color of our skin. And so part of our job is to be aware of the fact that we get that little boost and use our white privilege to try to dismantle some of the systems that make it harder for other people who don't have that privilege. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Barely any, but it's there and it can make a difference.
Well, that was me zooming in very far.
Well, whether it's this or this can kind of depend on where you sit and how you feel. And if you're sitting on top of the world, maybe it doesn't look like that tough to get up. But if you're standing at the bottom trying to get on top, it looks like a much higher climb. Do you have any other questions about the readings or about what's happening this week?
I feel like
really, no.
all of them got answered, actually.
Great. Okay, so you've done a great job, and we are coming close to the end of the semester.
No.
We're going to have final projects, but not quite yet. Next week is going to be the last week we have a regular current events Shapiro School discussion, and I want to mix it up. So here's my idea. I want you to go through the news and find stories that interest you. And instead of me uploading an intro video on Monday, I want you to upload an intro video and tell me what we're going to be talking about. And put the links to the articles below. And then we will talk about whatever you've chosen from your reading of the news. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay, well, I look forward to seeing what you chose. Thanks for another great discussion.
Bye.
Bye.